That the best part of your career, your life is still ahead of you. You know, I really honestly do feel that way.
But I'm amazed.
Luther Vandross had one of the most beautiful voices in R&B music history. His smooth singing made millions of fans fall in love with songs like Never Too Much and Here and Now. But behind his gentle public image, Luther was known for being a perfectionist who had very strong opinions about other singers. While the world loved his romantic ballads, Luther was quietly building a reputation in the music industry as someone who was very critical of other artists. Luther wasn't afraid to speak his mind when he felt other performers didn't meet his high standards. He would sometimes get into arguments with other singers backstage or make cutting remarks during interviews. His dislike for certain performers became well-known gossip throughout the music business. Tonight, we're looking at Luther's most difficult relationships with other artists, showing the conflicts that were hidden beneath his polished public personality. These weren't just simple disagreements about music. We're talking about serious professional grudges that lasted for many years. You might be surprised to learn which famous Grammy-winning artist he once dismissed as all flash, no substance during a private recording session, or which popular group he refused to perform with after a collaboration went badly wrong. Get ready for the untold story of Luther Vandross's biggest musical rivalries, where incredible talent mixed with huge egos and smooth soul music collided with bitter industry politics. This countdown will change how you think about the late, great singer forever. The Teddy Pendergrass rivalry, starting our list at number 6, is a rivalry that shook the foundation of smooth R&B music. Luther Vandross versus Teddy Pendergrass. These two powerful vocalists should have been natural friends and allies, but instead they became bitter competitors fighting for the same audience and recognition. Tension between them started in the early 1980s when both singers were trying to win over the same fans. Teddy had already made his name as the king of romantic bedroom ballads with hits like Love TKO, but Luther was quickly rising up the charts with his own style of sophisticated soul music. Record company executives loved creating competition between the two singers, and the media enjoyed comparing them constantly. Things got really nasty during the 1983 Soul Train Music Awards. According to people who were working backstage, Luther allegedly told a reporter that Teddy's voice lacked technical skill and relied too much on raw emotion instead of actual singing ability. When Teddy heard about these comments, he reportedly shot back by claiming that Luther was too polished and didn't have enough street credibility to appeal to real R&B fans. The feud reached its worst point when both artists were being considered for the same movie soundtrack opportunity. Industry sources claim that Luther actively worked against Teddy getting the job, even going so far as to argue that Teddy's recent car accident had damaged his vocal abilities. This comment apparently crossed a line that Teddy never forgave. Their Cold War continued for years, with both singers' teams refusing to acknowledge each other in public. Even at industry events and award shows, they would carefully avoid being photographed together, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that everyone in the room could feel. The Anita Baker feud. At number 5 on our list is one of the most surprising feuds in R&B history. Luther Vandross versus the legendary Anita Baker. Both artists shared similar sophisticated musical styles, but that's exactly what made their rivalry so intense and personal. The drama began in 1986 when Anita's album Rapture started climbing the charts at the same time as Luther's Give Me the Reason. Both albums were targeting the same upscale adult contemporary audience, creating direct competition that neither artist was happy about. Music industry insiders remember the tension being thick whenever both singers' teams were present at the same events. According to a former Elektra Records executive, Luther felt threatened by Anita's success because she represented everything he thought he had exclusive ownership of: classy musical arrangements, jazz influences, and crossover appeal to both black and white audiences. He allegedly complained to his management team that Anita was copying his blueprint and didn't deserve all the critical praise she was receiving. The situation exploded during a 1987 recording session where both artists were supposed to work together on a duet for a charity album. Multiple witnesses claimed that Luther walked out after hearing Anita's vocal arrangement, saying her approach was too theatrical and would overshadow his own contribution. Anita reportedly responded by calling Luther arrogant and impossible to work with. Their mutual dislike became common knowledge in the industry when neither would agree to perform at the same benefit concerts. Event planners learned quickly that booking one singer meant losing the other, creating awkward situations that lasted throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s. The Peabo Bryson conflict, coming in at number 4, is a feud that shocked the R&B world. Luther Vandross versus Peabo Bryson. These two singers should have been perfect collaborators, but instead they developed one of the nastiest rivalries in smooth soul history. The trouble started when both singers were competing for the same high-profile duet opportunities in the mid-1980s. Peabo had already scored massive hits with Roberta Flack and was becoming known as the go-to male voice for romantic duets. Luther wanted that same reputation and felt that Peabo was blocking his path to duet stardom. Everything came to a head during a 1985 recording session for a major movie soundtrack. Both singers were invited to audition for a duet with Whitney Houston. According to studio engineers who were present, Luther arrived early and heard Peabo's vocal takes through the control room speakers. He allegedly stormed out, telling the producers that Peabo sang with no soul and was just a pretty voice with no real substance. When Peabo found out about these comments, he fired back during a radio interview. He claimed that Luther was jealous because he couldn't connect emotionally with female singers the way Peabo could. He suggested that Luther's perfectionist attitude made him difficult for women to work with, which explained why he rarely had successful duets. The final blow came when Peabo landed the Beauty and the Beast duet with Celine Dion, a song that Luther desperately wanted to record. Industry sources say Luther never forgave Peabo for what he saw as stealing his dream collaboration opportunity. The rivalry between them lasted for years, with both camps carefully avoiding each other at industry events. The Jeffrey Osborne competition. At number 3, we uncover a rivalry that divided the smooth R&B world, Luther Vandross versus Jeffrey Osborne. Both artists had mastered the art of romantic ballads, but their similar styles created a competition that turned surprisingly vicious behind the scenes. The conflict started heating up in 1982 when Jeffrey left the band LTD to pursue his solo career. His debut album featured the same sophisticated production style that Luther was becoming famous for, and radio stations started comparing their voices constantly. Luther reportedly hated these comparisons and felt that Jeffrey was riding on his coattails to achieve success. Things got personal during the 1984 American Music Awards rehearsals. According to backup singers who witnessed the exchange, Luther approached Jeffrey backstage and allegedly said his high notes sounded strained and unnatural. Jeffrey shot back that Luther was just angry because he could hit notes that Luther never could, calling him a one-trick pony who relied on studio tricks rather than natural talent. The situation exploded when both artists were offered spots on the same summer tour. Promoters wanted them to alternate headlining duties, sharing equal billing. But Luther refused to share top billing with Jeffrey, telling his management team that Jeffrey didn't have enough hit songs to deserve co-headliner status. This was despite the fact that Jeffrey's songs like On the Wings of Love were dominating the radio charts. Their feud became public knowledge when neither would appear on each other's television specials or award show tributes. Industry veterans remember having to carefully schedule recording sessions to avoid booking conflicts between their teams. The rivalry created an uncomfortable atmosphere whenever both singers were scheduled to appear at the same events. The Freddy Jackson battle. At number 2 on our list is Luther's most bitter contemporary rivalry, his feud with Freddy Jackson. This conflict was personal, professional, and absolutely brutal for both singers involved. The war began in 1985 when Freddy burst onto the music scene with Rock Me Tonight, and immediately got compared to Luther by every music critic in America. Both singers had similar smooth delivery styles, but Freddy was younger, hungrier, and openly trying to take Luther's crown as the king of romantic R&B. Luther felt deeply disrespected when Freddy started calling himself the new Luther Vandross in interviews and promotional materials. According to former Capitol Records staff members, Luther was furious about this and demanded that his record label take legal action to stop Freddy from using his name for promotion. When that legal action failed to materialize, Luther decided to get petty and make things personal. The breaking point came at the 1986 Soul Train Awards afterparty. Multiple witnesses saw Luther approach Freddy's table and allegedly tell him face-to-face that he was nothing more than a cheap imitation who would never have real staying power in the music business. Freddy reportedly stood up from his table and called Luther a has-been who was threatened by younger talent coming up in the industry. Their mutual hatred became legendary in the music industry when Luther actively tried to block Freddy from getting certain performance opportunities. Record executives remember Luther threatening to pull out of television specials if Freddy was also booked to appear. He even convinced some radio programmers to limit Freddy's airplay by suggesting that his voice was too similar to Luther's and would confuse listeners. The feud lasted for years, with both singers refusing to acknowledge each other publicly, despite often performing at the same venues and industry events. The atmosphere was always tense when both camps were present, and everyone in the industry knew about their bitter rivalry. The Barry White Showdown. Taking the top spot on our countdown is Luther's most legendary feud, his bitter rivalry with the maestro himself, Barry White. This wasn't just about music or professional competition. It was a battle about who truly owned the soul of romantic R&B music. The conflict started back in the late 1970s when Luther was still doing background vocals for other artists, and Barry White was dominating the love song market. According to industry insiders, Luther allegedly told friends that Barry's famously deep voice was just a gimmick and that real singing required vocal range and technical ability, not just a low register and heavy breathing. Things escalated when both artists were competing for the same demographic audience in the early 1980s. Barry had built his musical empire on bedroom ballads and romantic songs, but Luther's more sophisticated approach was starting to steal Barry's audience. According to former members of Barry's Love Unlimited Orchestra, Barry felt personally insulted that Luther was being called a better vocalist by music critics and industry professionals. The nuclear moment in their rivalry happened during a 1983 recording studio encounter in Los Angeles. Both singers ended up at the same recording facility on the same night by coincidence. Studio engineers reported hearing raised voices through the supposedly soundproof walls as Barry allegedly confronted Luther about disrespecting the foundation that older artists like himself had built for R&B music. Luther supposedly fired back that Barry's era was over, and that real musicians with actual talent were taking control of the industry. This exchange cut deep because Barry had worked hard to establish himself as a serious artist, not just a novelty act with a deep voice. Barry never forgave what he saw as Luther's arrogance toward veteran performers who had paved the way for younger artists. Industry insiders claim that Barry actively campaigned against Luther getting certain awards and recognition, believing that the younger singer showed no respect for R&B history and the artists who came before him. Their Cold War lasted until Barry's death in 2003, with neither man ever publicly acknowledging their legendary behind-the-scenes battles. Even at industry events where both were present, they maintained a professional distance while everyone around them could feel the tension. The legacy of Luther's rivalries. Luther Vandross was undeniably one of the most talented vocalists in music history, but his perfectionist nature and high standards created enemies throughout his career. These feuds reveal that even the smoothest voices can hide sharp edges and strong opinions about artistic integrity. Looking at these rivalries, it's clear that Luther took his craft very seriously and felt protective of his artistic territory. He wasn't willing to share the spotlight easily, especially with artists he felt were copying his style or not meeting his standards of excellence. Whether this was about protecting his artistry or just being difficult to work with depends on your perspective. Some might argue that Luther's high standards pushed the entire R&B genre to be better, even if it created personal conflicts along the way. Others might see these feuds as evidence of an ego that got in the way of collaboration and mutual support among artists. What's certain is that these behind-the-scenes battles shaped the R&B music landscape of the 1980s and 1990s in ways that fans never fully understood. The competition between these artists may have driven them all to create better music, even if it came at the cost of personal relationships and industry harmony. Luther Vandross left behind an incredible musical legacy, but these stories remind us that even the most beloved artists are human beings with complex personalities, professional jealousies, and artistic disagreements that sometimes turn personal. The world of professional music has always been competitive, but Luther's story shows just how intense those competitions can become when enormous talent meets equally enormous ego. His feuds with these other legendary artists reveal the passionate, perfectionist personality that drove him to create some of the most beautiful R&B music ever recorded, even if that same personality sometimes made him difficult to work with. These rivalries may have been painful for everyone involved, but they also represent an era when R&B artists cared deeply about their craft and weren't willing to compromise their artistic vision for anyone. In that sense, Luther's feuds might be seen as a testament to how seriously he took his music and his place in R&B history,